Different cultures around the world have developed different views of nature throughout human history, many rooted in traditional systems of knowledge which indigenous people use to understand and interpret their environment. These systems of managing the environment allow for an integral part of the cultural identity and social fabric of many indigenous populations. In parallel, their knowledge system embodies a wealth of wisdom and experience gained over many centuries. Modern Western science favors analytical and reductionist methods as opposed to more intuitive and holistic views found in traditional knowledge systems. Western science is objective and quantitative as opposed to traditional knowledge, which is mainly subjective and qualitative. Western science is based on academic and collected through literature, while traditional knowledge is often passed on orally from generations. The Western tradition of thinking is developed a different approach to gaining knowledge from complex systems, but it would be equally useful to learn how traditional approaches explain such complexity. Not only are these more holistic, but they also seem better suited to coping with the uncertainty and unpredictability. The Western empirical objective way of thinking could be too reductionist to deal with complex systems, while traditional knowledge systems focus on preserving their own social, cultural, and environmental stability and integrity, and is therefore based on co-evolution with nature and the environment, allowing them to adapt to environmental changes. By understanding that Western science is consequentially linked to the Western world's approach to the architectural discipline, we can start to analyse the cracks and missteps of such approach. In the film The Old Village and the Architect, documents Cesar Vieira, a visionary Portuguese architect, as he plans the rehabilitation and monuments of the heritage site in Santiago, Cape Verde. The film explores the relationship between the conflict between these two worlds, two cultures, Caesar's Western top-down approach with different ideas of modernity and progress than the locals. This documentary acts as a case study for the effectiveness of the Western design process in a localized traditional context. One of the main reasons why this architectural design process is thought of as being difficult has a lot to do with the lack of clear objectives, identifying problems and addressing these correspondingly by means of a specific design, without losing track of the bigger picture. In the documentary, Caesar has an objective of historical preservation, but has a hard time identifying the real problems affecting the local residents. His specific design solution differs from the one the residents had in mind. Therefore, designing architecture boils down to solving a wicked problem. The term wicked problem was described in 1973 by American professors Horst Rachel and Melvin Weber, applying the term to social planning. They argue that the professional rationalism and efficiency on which modern science research and civil engineering are based have failed to provide the right tools to deal with our societal problems, because a rationalist method for solving problems relies on system analysis. It is naturally unsuitable for coping with the problems that are deeply rooted in society, since the system of interconnected nodes would simply be too large to contain. We can see this being true for the architectural design, which deals with planning problems which concern communities as a whole. When an architect designs a building, it is crucial for them to develop an opinion on the societal problems that the building will be addressing. For example, they cannot responsibly design a house without considering the way people live or could live, or design a school without looking into the difficulties and challenges facing the educational system. Because the architectural designer typically designs buildings with a considerable lifespan, essentially helping shape the future of society. Decisions that are made during the design process have far-reaching repercussions that are hard to predict beforehand and only become visible at a much later point in time. Due to the sheer scale of the system in which the architect operates, both the problems and the effects of the design decisions that attempt to solve it are particularly difficult to define. Since architecture is connected with such a large system or context, it is exceptionally hard to recognize the elements in the system that contribute to the root of the design problem. Some Western architecture attempts to acknowledge these wicked problems and solve them through bottom-up approaches to design. Bernard Shumi's Pactes Villette, far more interesting than deconstructivist planning methods, are the abstract red follies that were designed without purpose with the theoretical explanation of architecture from events. The follies were given to the community to have an input onto their inhabitation. The results were surprising and used in ways arguably an architect could not have predicted. For example, a safe space for sex workers to meet up, a space to scatter ashes from residents that died in the hands of the state with no kin, or others were simply turned into cafes. Schumi created a framework for the community to adapt and mould to their desire in an attempt to solve wicked problems in the architectural discipline. Most Western architecture is typically taught from literally a top-down approach, the plan drawing fitting the program to a general shape. Even the section drawing can be seen as distancing the architect from the actual experience of being inside the space and therefore alienating the residents the building will be created for. BIM software such as Revit can be seen as the epitome of the Western architectural wicked problem. Therefore, reducing complicated issues, emphasizing efficiency and maximization of output, and therefore detract from the purpose and function, drawing more distance between the architect and inhabitant. After all, what's the point in a highly efficient material building if its use is banal? Different to traditional top-down approaches to design, the contemporary Pinterest approach is commonplace in today's industry, but this creates a mismatch of on-trend design features that's focused formally, and it lacks any attempts to solve actual problems rooted in society. Even the architect's most important tool, the sketch, can be seen as an artificial representation of the reality of a building. Being subject to different styles and inaccuracy can lead to different interpretations and consequences of an initial idea. Another problem is the lack of tools, allowing a designer to truly test his or her design against the reality before committing to actually building it. Therefore, the design process is naturally unforgiving towards experimenting. To get closer to solving the wicked problems, an architect needs a feedback loop. The more experience gained, the better they'll be able to respond. To get closer to solving problems, an architect needs a feedback loop. The more experience gained, the better they'll be able to adapt to the change. Bernard Schumi's declaration, "There is no architecture without action, no architecture without events." In a game world, everything is defined by actions. A rock or a wall must be encoded so the player may bounce off them. Materiality is contributed through the event. The design of architectural worlds through layers of representation, rules, and events resonates most clearly with the generation of architects preceding Schumi's event architecture. Their work explored architecture as a project through multiple strands and tackled the rise of consumerist technoculture, of which games have become a flagship medium. By their nature, game space involves sequences of user-instigated events and systemic reactions taking place in artificial worlds. Yet such relations already concerned many of the 20th century's most experimental architects. In game design, the process of digitally making architecture can be seen as playing a game. However, this puts the architect in the privileged position as not only one qualified to play the game, leaving out the others that are actually going to inhabit the building. Therefore, a top-down approach to game design can be seen as restrictive. People playing the game are not given the means to explore and shape the experience in a meaningful way. Games are situated in a unique position by allowing everyone to start at the same level, lowering the hierarchy and eliminating any cultural biases between the architect and the user. Architecture should learn from actual games that do succeed in capturing an audience before they produce real architecture in an aid to help them solve wicked problems. Can we use bottom-up game design as a way to engage with community participation, providing them with a sustainable framework via virtual space? Can we learn through game design a different approach to architecture that aims to empower traditional systems of knowledge and therefore strengthen cultural identity? Could spaces like Parc de Villette be created in a virtual space, allowing digital visitors to mould, suggest and network actions? Can design fiction explore a new potential in games with participation and interaction, allowing accurate depictions of the testing of future scenarios and buildings. As the future of games lie in the recording the data from players, can we ethically use data to monitor feedback, informing design decisions, providing the architects with more accurate and reliable feedback?